In this short talk episode, I speak to John Mink about forecasting challenges, sharing lessons from his career of navigating supply chain complexities. John encourages curiosity, empathy, and taking responsibility for one's cultural impact, believing small positive actions can help break cycles of blame and barrier building between teams. Listen up for the 5 key takeaways. I create clear thinking and decisive leaders who can amplify their influence. Contact me to find out how I can help you or your organisation. And today our guest is John Mink. How are you doing, John?
I'm great, Judith. How are you?
I'm really cool. And I'm just wondering, do you love dancing in the rain?
No, I can't say I love Dancing in the Rain, but I really think that Singing in the Rain was actually one of my favorite movies. So there was some dancing in that movie too.
John, tell us more about you.
All right, so thanks. My quick background is spent most of my life in the corporate world. Ended up getting into the supply chain, mostly because I had my temper. So they put me in supply chain, and I spent a lot of times, working through, pieces of supply chain. And really, what I came out of it is that, we think of supply chains as sequential, and I'm like, no, it's not sequential. It's there's a whole bunch of variables that have to work together. So I call it, you got to look at it like a 3D chess match. Every decision you make has a trade-off. And spending some time in there, it's amazing on how little effort that companies go through because they find it hard to really develop and manage a good forecast. And that drives everything for the company. And so the results usually end up being relatively poor. So forecasts are always bad in nature, but over time, you can learn where the biases lie and try to take those out of the forecast, so you can be more pragmatic with your company and save a lot of cost and actually improve the revenue.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. What I think is really interesting, because you've written a book, haven't you? Forecasting with Outliers, as in LIARS, which I find really intriguing because you talk about things like mitigating blame and bias, and it's not something that people would think about in forecasting. So tell me more.
Oh, well, thank you. It gets, being in roles in supply chain, what you typically find is that when you get to an end result, either you don't have the product, it's not there on time, you have too much inventory, you're dealing with potential quality issues. It all comes down to is that the execution has not met expectations. And so that could lead to cash flow problems, that could lead to revenue issues, that could lead to cost problems. And so to me, it's usually the same folks trying to clean up the mess where those decisions on the front end were made months and many months or even years ago to end up with poor execution. And so tying that together, you find that when the execution's not there, you end up actually putting blame on individuals or groups that basically had nothing to do with the planning part of the equation. So you're really focusing on a symptom and not really looking at, hey, what is where can you orchestrate this to make it a better potential outcome? Like I term it as kind of like if you go to a symphony and all the players and the sections first don't get along with each other, and number two, they're all playing at different sets of music, it's not going to come out very good. So bringing disparate and teams together is very, very key to try to drive a more successful execution. And getting the clarinet section to understand the trombone section is sometimes quite tough.
Thank you. And why do you think things like blame has such an impact on forecasting? Because I would have thought if forecasting is looking ahead, how does blame factor into it?
Mm. So on the forecasting side, you'll hear even those that are actually eventually, from a forecast perspective, you have to put in, hey, here's the actual forecast, here's the product that we're going to need, these are the orders we're going to place on our suppliers. And what you'll find is many times is that, hey, the ones that are putting in the forecast are looking for inputs here. So you'll hear all the time that a lot of time in the inputs, well, sales has no idea what they want. The customers don't know what they want. We are, and everyone you talk to into the chain are like, well, I don't know. Or they're looking for an excuse not to actually have not to take on the responsibility, and it develops like this blame culture. And so when it starts expanding, and then everyone's blaming each other for a bad execution because it's not looked at it from a holistic perspective, and it can actually drive a very poor company culture. It develops walls, it develops barriers, and it actually can end up getting worse because you always have this little tension always between a sales organization and a supply chain organization that always seem to be at odds. So making enemies of each other does not help. And my view is, hey, supply chain doesn't exist without sales. Sales can't exist without supply chain. So why not, look at the bigger picture together and work on things that you can control and be more understanding of the bigger picture as you learn through your sales and operations planning process.
Okay, thank you for that. So does that mean that culture itself has a big part in the ability for a great forecast to be written?
Absolutely. In fact, I think to me that's one of the key drivers, where if the culture is in a way where no one's going to stick their neck out because they're waiting, no one's going to stick their neck on the line because someone's always going to be there to chop off your head. That actually will have people not take risks, have people not make decisions, and say, "Hey, I'll default to the blame section and say, okay, say, well, so and so, made this decision, so I'm not accountable for this one because this person, drove that type of decision." Where in many instances, there's different experience sets within the organization that, hey, if the culture is in a way where you can speak out, provide input, regardless of what level that you're in the organization, it may be a great learning experience to say, hey, we're not using this variable, we're not looking at this particular piece of information that actually can improve the execution or the outcome of the company. So to me, culture plays a good part. And I would say I've been in organizations that have had really poor culture, or I've watched it turn into a poor culture. And I've actually been in companies that had phenomenal culture, and I found that that was the best way to kind of strive. And what you saw, the ones in the poor culture, the outcomes were not very good. Been with one company that had 140,000 employees at one point, now down to 8. Uh, uh,
That's
so
a big difference.
yeah, that's a big difference. Everyone lost on that one. And then I've seen another company where the culture has done was really really good, where the supply chain became the supply chain and be able to outclass the competition became better than as the industry standard. And I would say all of it was because of the culture, because people were given enough room to move out. And for the most part, people worked very, very well together, um, and really enabled opinions and information to come out that otherwise, if you spoke up and anyone thought it was ludicrous, you get your head chopped off. It is, to me, is actually critical to help driving a much better outcome.
So thank you for sharing with that. So
What are the effects of bias then in the system when you're forecasting? What sort of bias? Is it personal bias or bias towards, the actual outcome you're looking for?
Yes. So, so to me, especially in the public company world, I mean, you have to set a market expectation on, hey, are you going to grow? Is your revenue going to go down? Are your costs going up? Are your cash flow? You're going to have issues. And so, many times, you have to provide an outlook. And so sometimes, right, we don't like as human beings to hear bad news. We just want to hear the positive stuff. So we don't have to feel the pain as so to speak, in the current mode. And so you'll find a lot of times that there's very optimistic forecasts that come in because, right, you haven't executed yet, but there's many things that could happen where you can get a sale and you can get a cost reduction or improve quality. There's many ways that you can factor in bias into that. My best example is that I work for a company where the product managers, and I was one of them, that will provide forecast for his or her product into the system, and that was the main forecast that got driven throughout the organization. What you find is that the individuals that are driving forecasts for their product, the bias is to be on the optimistic side because they get measured on their revenue, their growth, their cost. So many times you'll see optimistic forecasts going in, meaning you're way over forecasting. When you look at the entire picture, there's no way when you add up all the product forecasts that the company's going to achieve that. And so I call it the syndrome where it is like you're dealing with like a beauty pageant contest of kids where the parents are actually the judges. And so it becomes very, very biased toward the individual product that are not looking at the entire ecosystem. And you're kind of fighting, in a way, you're kind of fighting how do we take that out of the forecast? You can't look at these individually and add them up. Something's got to give because you're not going to drive all that supply it'll never happen or have very, very low likelihood of success.
Thank you. Do you think what we need to do as organizations then is to ensure that we're not paying people based on forecasts, because it's in their best interest to either be low so that they get paid more when they achieve, or the other way around, depending on how it works in terms of how they're bonused?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time on how to incentivize how incentivize and how they work. And what you'll find many times from an incentive, forecast accuracy being one of the measures, but it really comes down to revenue, cost, cash flow, and customer satisfaction. Those are the uber things those are the uber metrics that have to work together, and some of them trade off with each other. For instance, you want high service levels to your customer. Many times that means you got to hold a lot more inventory because you don't know what they're going to potentially be buying or not. So with that service level, there's a trade-off to cash flow because you're holding on more inventory and maybe a risk to excess and obsolescence. So to me, it is basically don't put yourself in a mode where the metric drives the behavior as an individual metric. You got to be able to, especially at the executive levels, use all four metrics conjointly, that everyone has a piece to play in revenue, cost, cash flow, and the service levels that you have to your customer, because they do trade off. Many organizations, sit only in one of those four boxes, and there's always conflict, and you just kind of let the organization succeed. So my view is, that all those metrics are important, but they're important together, not as individual metrics.
That makes a lot of sense. So if someone is sitting there and going, right, I need to create a forecast for next year, is there a methodology or a way of thinking that they need to do?
Yeah, so first off, before any type of forecast, and you have many, depending on the size of your company, you can have a lot of people. But I think the first thing to do is really do what you can to align on a set of assumptions first. So um, meaning that, hey, these are good assumptions to enter a forecast with. So um, probably today many companies are struggling because now they have too much inventory because they believe the order book when COVID came through and extended their lead times, that many companies now struggle with inventory. So now, right, in the assumptions, does that mean you got to provide discounts, you got to provide incentives, and so a lower margin to move that inventory into your planning cycle. And if you have visibility to your customers' inventories, if you have visibility to what your customers are doing from a expansion or retraction perspective, it's really critical before you start forecasting is base yourself off a set of key assumptions before you go in. Many times, and I've been involved in it, and I'm guilty of this many times, you go into a forecast and then you can't, there's no one's on the same page because you're not sitting on the same set of assumptions. So you're arguing against the wind, I call it. So really, I think that to me is spending time on forecast assumptions, which your desires, of course, of the company, but those assumptions are really, really critical to help align your organization as you move forward from a forecasting perspective.
Okay, that makes sense. So tell me, why are you so passionate about this?
Because I had to clean all this stuff up. I think to me, I take it personally. I was been very blessed to have, to hold some key positions and some key leadership positions. And to me, that's not entitlement, right? That is service. And you have a responsibility not only for your department, you actually, in some instances, you have a responsibility for your entire company. And even this, right? You have a responsibility for your supply base. You have a responsibility for your customer base as well. And so, to me, I found it. I found that the going and driving blame does nothing. It benefits nothing. Nothing in the organizations. Nothing doesn't benefit your customer. It doesn't benefit your organization, and it doesn't benefit your supply base as well. So to me, it's like, hey, how can you approach this differently? As I grew throughout my career, I've watched what I thought was one of the greatest companies in the world, just fall through to a company that no one really knows much about it anymore. And it was I took it personally, walking people out, your friends out the door, walking other departments out the door. I took it personally, and to me, we weren't necessarily truthful with ourselves. And a few people escaped with some great packages. The rest of us ended up not in very good shape. Had to get out and look for new roles and jobs. And to me, it's a big responsibility. And to me, I try to hold myself accountable for the positions that I'm responsible for. I don't ever want to do that again. So if I vowed to myself, during that time, if I ever got into more senior management or upper management, I will try my best not to make these same type of decisions. So I learned what I thought went well, and I learned from stuff that didn't go well. But I've taken it personally, and to me, you take that as a responsibility, not for you. You have a responsibility for many constituents throughout your entire chain. And if you can lower the barriers in the walls of the organization, it's unbelievable what you can achieve collectively that benefits all three.
That's brilliant. I think it's always good to have that little insight into people and to why they do things. I think that's quite interesting. Thank you for doing that.
I do have to laugh. The organizations I've been to always ask the team members, so do you want my job? And everyone's like, no way. I would never want to do what you do. And so there's an art involved in that as well. But the reality is you got to be able to, withstand a lot of flack, cynicism, criticism, but really is to keep your eye on the bigger prize. And so it's a challenge to work your way through that. But it does eventually take a toll. And but to me is I learned a lot on who I don't want to be versus more than who I want to be. So I'm continuing to learn as a leader and try to continue to improve.
And people can't ask for anything else. John, before we finish, is there anything that you want to add or leave with the audience?
So those that are kind of involved, it's all on how, to me, how you deal and treat people. Yes, business is frustrating. Business is hard, but to go out and just criticize and blame people, now you're part of that culture just by doing it. You maybe even not even recognize to it. And so to me, culture is influenced by everybody. So people really don't understand the power and influence that they individually can have on the culture, the way you treat, the way you discuss, the way you're curious. So my sense is that as you go into your day-to-day, and this is true even with your own personal life too, be curious, right? People make decisions that you think are silly or ridiculous, but then when you understand what that individual is seeing or why the individual made that type of decision, you may actually learn something. And if you learn something, guess what? It is now part of your tool belt.
Perfect. That's fantastic. John, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Judith. I really appreciate the time.
You're welcome. And thank you out there for tuning into the Maverick Paradox podcast. I'm Judith Germain, your host, and I hope you've enjoyed listening to today's conversation.
The Maverick Paradox. Judith Germain is an author, speaker, consultant, mentor, and trainer, and the leading authority on Maverick leadership. She is the founder of the Maverick Paradox, which supports organizations to enhance their leadership capabilities and to help business owners develop and grow their businesses. Judith enables individuals, business owners, and organizations to improve their impact and influence. She is also HR Zone's leadership columnist, and her expert opinion has appeared in national, international, and trade press.